Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the DMV NFL Show. I'm Richard Brown, coming to you live from Tacoma Park, Maryland. A lot of crazy things going on in the NFL last week. I mean, who would have thought that the Chargers would have beaten the Broncos and the Dolphins beat the Steelers? I mean, guess my big gorilla, tiny flea analogy must have gotten to the Dolphins and Chargers, and it made them mad, or I don't know, maybe the Dolphins and Chargers just decided to show up. I don't know, but it has been bizarre world in the NFL this year. The Redskins have won 4 straight games. The Baltimore Ravens haven't been playing particularly well. New England going undefeated without Tom Brady. The Arizona Cardinals not being that good. I mean, just a lot of crazy things. Cincinnati, Green Bay. It's been bizarre world, and that's an understatement. But, in the news, there's been a big feud between Stephen A. Smith and Chris Baker. And the whole thing stemmed from was when Ricky Jean-Francois and Chris Baker came off the field against the Eagles and said, we own the East. All they do is pick those trash-ass Eagles. Stephen A. Smith was like, oh, wow, you won 4 straight games. Congratulations. And he was, pointing out all the history of the Redskins being a laughingstock franchise. To be entirely honest with you, I just think this thing is just, keeps building and building and building. And I understand both sides. I mean, Stephen A. Smith is correct from the standpoint the Redskins have been to the playoffs 5 times in the last 22 years. They haven't won a Super Bowl since 1991. They have high expectations every year, and they come up short. The Redskins do look like a different team this year. I mean, they're playing great. They beat a formidable Philadelphia Eagle team. They took it to them. But they need to win consistently. I mean, and the Redskins have won 4 straight games. They're beating the teams they're supposed to beat. They lost to 2 really good teams. So, I mean, they're pretty much fulfilling expectations. And, Gruden coming out and, saying it was disrespectful, and Chris Baker, yes, of course, the Redskins want respect. But if you want respect, you got to keep winning. You have to keep winning. And, right now, the Redskins are a slightly above average team. I mean, they're playing great. The defense is getting better. The run game's getting better. Kirk Cousins is getting better each week, but they need to keep winning consistently. And, 4 straight wins is great. I mean, that's consistency, but they need to keep it up. And the only way the Redskins are going to get respect in the media is they need to win a lot of games. That's what it's going to come down to. Now, are the Redskins getting ahead of themselves? I don't think so. I mean, I think that they're very focused on the Lions this week. They know that's going to be a tough game. And Gruden has come out and said, that they put hard work in each week. I don't think they're overlooking any opponent. If you watch the sound effects game of Josh Norman rallying the guys in the Brown game, he said, don't fall for this trap. I mean, they treat every opponent very seriously. And I think that's the big difference with this Redskin team in comparison to the others. They're not taking opponents lightly. They're going in, they're focused. And I think that's also a credit to Scott McCloughan, the kind of guys he's been drafting to bring in. The main point of all this is there's going to be criticism from loudmouths like Stephen A. Smith. Just win. I mean, there's no need to stoke the fire by saying it's disrespectful. All you got to do is just say, that's his opinion. Right now we're focused on the Lions. That you got to go a little Belichickian, with your responses. That's what it's all about. Other big news is Jordan Reed hiding his concussion. And it wouldn't shock me if the league came down hard on the Redskins and on Jordan Reed for this. And you know what? The Redskins deserve all the punishment they're going to get because concussions are nothing to screw around with. I saw the movie Concussion. I also watched the PBS documentary on Dr. Amalu's research, about CTE and about the effects of concussions. And, back in the day before they had this concussion protocol, the players would just go back out there and, you expose yourself to, hazardous toxins pooling in your brain and affecting your speech and increasing the chances of depression, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, or loss of motor skills. Concussions are very serious, and no one is going to question Jordan Reed's toughness. No one would questions his toughness. He's a great tight end. He's one of the best in the game. But at the end of the day, you got to care about your health. Jordan Reed has had between 5 to 6 concussions already, dating back to what happened to him at Florida when he was in college, and you wonder how many years is he going to have left. And, the league is taking a really serious precaution on concussions. Apparently when concussion systems happen, there's a league-approved neurologist that's on the sideline. They run the tests, and if they deem you that you have symptoms, you're in concussion protocol. And that allows you to properly recover. And I think that with these new concussion protocols in place, it enables the player to heal properly so that the damage to the brain is minimal. I watched a documentary the other day about the '85 Bears, and players like Dave Duerson, he had a bunch of concussions, and the damage just grew so severe, that he suffered from severe depression and he killed himself. And Jim McMahon has been having a lot of problems. His brain tends to wander. He uses puzzles every morning to keep his brain active and sharp. And there were times where, he couldn't sleep very well. He couldn't talk very well because his head had constant pain. And, he went to a doctor in New York, and they determined that the effects of CTE were blocking the flow of spinal fluid in the brain, and they had to do routine adjustments to restore the flow of spinal fluid, and it's been helping him. But, the damage to his brain is already done. Jordan Reed just needs to understand that the minute you get a concussion, go see the neurologist and have him look at you. It's not worth jeopardizing your future by playing through a concussion. I don't think his teammates would question his toughness, because it's a very serious thing. And if Jordan Reed has a couple more concussions, then he should probably retire because of all the damage that's probably being done to his brain. And you never know what's going to happen to him when he gets older. I mean, will he be prone to dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? I don't know. Brett Favre, he was being interviewed by someone, and they asked him the question, how many times did you play through concussions where nowadays, modern rules would tell you to sit out? And he said a lot, and he's been suffering from memory loss, and he's confirmed to have chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the brain damage caused by concussions. So, and it'll be interesting to see what Troy Aikman's like in a couple of years. He's had 10 concussions. Steve Young has had a lot of concussions. And, just the whole concussion issue in general. I mean, the NFL is, they're bringing more awareness to the situation about concussions, and they're trying to, get research to fund it, and hopefully they can keep researching and developing better gear for players to withstand the effects of like head injuries and brain trauma. So, if I was Jordan Reed, I would really seriously consider next time when you have symptoms, just go to the neurologist, heal properly so that you're ready to go and you don't cause long-term damage in the future. And in Baltimore Ravens news right now, I mean, third straight, loss. They've had a lot of injuries. Jimmy Smith is hurt. Terrell Suggs tore his biceps. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks. Flacco is hurt right now. There's no timetable when Ronnie Staley is going to come back. The Ravens have been struggling, for a couple of reasons. One, their offensive play calling hasn't been that great. They fired Mark Trestman. They brought in Marty Mornhinweg. And there was some improvement. There was a lot of improvement in that Giants game. They got more explosive plays. They were running the ball a little bit more, but they weren't scoring a lot of touchdowns. And that was the same problem with Trestman. I mean, you almost kind of think, was Trestman a scapegoat? I mean, I think John Harbaugh going for all these fourth down calls when you should just kick the field goal and take the points. I know there's some instances where you should go for it on fourth down, but there were 2 field goals taken off the board in the Giants game because he went for it on fourth down. He did that fake field goal against the Redskins that took points off the board. You got to play smart. There's no reason to be stubborn and be cocky and be big-headed. Just take the points because you got to play to win the game. You have to play to win the game. And I just think that, is Harbaugh on the hot seat? Yes and no. I mean, it's still early in the year. They could turn it around. I mean, the Ravens are a very good team, and they win games. But these bad decisions. I mean, is Steve Bisciotti thinking about making a change? I don't know. I think Harbaugh is an excellent coach. If he was fired, he'd be out of a job for all of 8 hours. But if anyone is probably going to get fired, it's going to be the general manager, Ozzie Newsome. I mean, you look at the past couple of years of their drafts, and they haven't been good. 2007, the last year Brian Billick was there. Adam Terry, a first-round pick offensive tackle, he's out of the league. I think it was 2009 or 2010 when they drafted Sergio Kindle, and he fell down the stairs and got a skull injury. I mean, that didn't work out. Letting guys go like Pernell McPhee. I think Ozzie thought he could just draft somebody and plug him in, but I mean, when healthy, he's been the anchor of that Bears defense, and he's played very, very well. Everyone criticizes the Haloti Ngata trade. I mean, I think that was the right move at the time. He was declining. I mean, he's played decent in Detroit. Brandon Williams is his name. He's played very, very well. Matt Elam, the safety, he's been a bust. He hasn't done anything. Jimmy Smith has been sporadic. They didn't re-sign Kenichi Osemele, and he's doing a great job in Oakland right now, and they have a big void on their offensive line because of it. They haven't done a very good job with centers. They brought in Gino Gradkowski. He hasn't done well. And Jeremy Zuda, he's been sporadic. And I think that after the year they won the Super Bowl, I think they should have started drafting potential replacements, for guys like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and Matt Burke. I mean, they've misfired on so many picks. And, if Ozzie did get fired, he'd be picked up by a team just like that, because no one can deny his overall body of work. He's done very, very well, but lately he's been striking out, and I think it's been hurting this team. And I think if anyone gets fired, it's probably going to be him before it's Harbaugh. But they have a tough game against the Jets this week. I think they have a pretty good shot of winning. They just need to stop beating themselves with penalties and making stupid gambles by going for it on fourth down. I mean, if they can get over that hump, I think they should be fine. But in other news, Tony Romo versus Dak Prescott. This is a no-brainer. You stick with Dak Prescott because he's the hot hand right now. They're playing with a lot more confidence. They're getting explosive plays by receivers who aren't that elite, like Cole Beasley and like Butler and, Jason Hanna, the tight end. I mean, Jason Witten's still getting balls. Terrence Williams is getting a lot of balls. They're running the ball well because of just the threat of Dak Prescott taking off, is opening things up. I mean, Tony Romo's had 3 back injuries in the past couple of years. He's had collarbone injuries. I mean, how much more does he have left? I just think you have to go with the hot hand, because if they go back to Tony Romo and they faceplant, then, Jerry Jones is going to, the fans are going to burn his house down. I just think it's a no-brainer. You stick with Dak Prescott, because he's the hot hand and he's going to win you games. Now, do they go to the Super Bowl this year? I don't think so. I think that there are better teams in the NFC right now, but Dallas is playing great. Their defense has been surprisingly good. Morris Claiborne is finally playing, the type of cornerback play that everyone thought he would when he was drafted out of LSU. They're getting some decent pressure on the quarterback. I mean, Rod Marinelli's an excellent defensive coordinator, so it's not that surprising that they're playing good. I mean, because he's all about the little things. I mean, he was an ex-Marine. He drills his players. He makes sure that they're in their best position to win. And you got to give Dallas credit. I mean, being a Redskins fan, it's kind of hard for me to say that, but you give them credit. They're exceeding expectations like crazy, and the NFC East in general has been exceeding expectations. I mean, the Redskins are 4-2. The Eagles are playing pretty well. The Giants, they're sporadic, but I mean, they look good. I mean, the Redskins and the Cowboys and the Eagles have been beating teams, that have been winning. So the NFC East, I mean, everyone talks about the AFC North being the toughest division. I mean, the NFC East is putting a hurting on the AFC North right now. Let's be real here. I mean, the Redskins have taken out the Browns and the Ravens. We'll see how they do against Cincinnati. Cincinnati got taken out by the Cowboys. The Giants took out the Ravens. It's the Steelers got taken out badly by the Eagles. You got to give the credit to the NFC East teams. They're playing a lot more hard-nosed, tough football, like the AFC North, what we're accustomed to seeing. But, it's like I said earlier, it's been bizarre world in the NFL. Teams that you think are going to be good are not good. Teams that are bad are playing better than people think. It's really, really interesting, and it's exciting. When we get back, we're going to talk about the Eddie Lacy injury, the trade for Niall Davis, and some other things that are happening. So we'll be right back. And we're back, and some breaking news that are happening right now. The NFL is reopening the investigation into Josh Brown's domestic abuse case. I think that he needs to be severely punished. I mean, domestic abuse is an ongoing issue not only in the NFL, but in this country. And he wasn't severely disciplined when the case first opened a couple months ago. And, based on the documents that, King County Sheriff's Office in Washington have been reviewing, I think if I was Goodell, I would suspend him the rest of the year without pay or suspend him indefinitely. I mean, with the whole Ray Rice issue, they handled that very poorly. And, Junior Gillette, he was not severely disciplined. Greg Hardy, I thought, should have been more severely disciplined. And I think that the NFL needs to start coming down harder on these players because, domestic abuse, any type of assault is inexcusable. And I think now is the time for them to really start, putting their foot down and, making these players aware that domestic abuse is not acceptable. I mean, as an NFL player, you are representing the NFL. And it's a bad look consistently if NFL players are abusing their significant others. I mean, not to mention it's morally wrong. I just think the NFL needs to do more with disciplining players for domestic abuse. It's inexcusable, and it's disappointing that, as a society, these NFL players that are adults can't conduct themselves in a better manner. So we'll see how that unfolds, but hopefully Goodell will come down hard on Josh Brown and discipline him. Also, what we want to talk about on the show here is the biggest disappointing players this season. And I would like to start out with Kirk Cousins. He's thrown 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He's completing 65% of his passes. He's thrown for 1,600 yards. But if you look at the tape, he's not really throwing the ball with as much confidence as he did last year. I mean, he's playing a lot better the first half of this year than he did the first half of last year. So who knows? He may catch fire and he may get the big contract, but he's been a disappointment, with all the weaponry he has around him. Deshaun Jackson, Jamison Crowder, Pierre Garçon, Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis, and then, Matt Jones is starting to get going, and Robert Kelly's starting to get going. A really good offensive line that he hasn't really been sacked a whole bunch by behind. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe the teams have been watching tape on him. Maybe they're starting to figure it out. But his interceptions have gone up in this year at the beginning of the season in comparison to last year at the beginning of the season. So he needs to get it going. Another Redskins player that's been disappointing has been Deshaun Jackson. His numbers have been very mediocre. He's only caught 1 touchdown pass all year. And maybe that has to do with Cousins has been overthrowing him left and right. And there's also been a lot of pass interference penalties on defenders trying to guard him. So he's creating mismatches and opening the door for other guys like Crowder and Garçon and Reed and Vernon Davis to catch balls. Jackson just needs to, there was a couple plays where he could have laid out for a catch, like the couple ones against the Ravens. But I think his decline in production has been relevant to what's been happening with Cousins. So hopefully those two guys can get it together. Another disappointing player has been Brock Osweiler. And disappointment's been an understatement. The Texans paid a lot of money to bring him in. And, according to reports, Denver had made an offer, but Osweiler just ignored him and signed with the Texans. And, yes, he got benched. But that's part of the business. Suck it up. Peyton Manning replaced you. Peyton Manning is one of the great quarterbacks of all time. And if Osweiler wanted to keep his job in Denver, he should have kept playing better. He throws 2 interceptions against the frickin' Chargers last year. And they could have lost that game and lost home field advantage. And Kubiak was like, no, I'm going to put Peyton in because I need a spark right now, and I need to get this team going. And if Osweiler feels disrespected like that, well, then he shouldn't be a quarterback in this league. It just shows he's not mentally tough. Put the big boy pants on. Let's go. He has not played well in Houston. He's thrown a lot of interceptions. He's been average. Well, he's been terrible against bad defenses. And, and if you looked at the game against the Colts, he didn't lead them to a win. Lamar Miller did. And then if you hear in the background, the crowd was chanting for Tom Savage. Now, I'm not saying Tom Savage is, the immediate answer. We don't know. He has a very small sample size, but he's got a big arm. He was good in college. If Osweiler keeps struggling, do you go to Tom Savage? I don't know. The Texans are still in the playoff hunt, and for all intents and purposes, they will probably win this division just because every other team in the division is garbage. But I think Rick Smith, their general manager, has made a colossal mistake. And, it kind of reminds me of like some of the big contracts that quarterbacks, get after playing a few good games. You look at Rob Johnson when he filled in for Mark Brunell in the late 90s. He had a couple good games, and then the Bills traded a first-round pick and signed him to a big deal, and he flopped. You look at the Detroit Lions, when they signed Scott Mitchell to a big contract. He had a few really nice games for the Dolphins in relief of Dan Marino and got a big contract. So, there's been a lot of cautionary tales about quarterbacks getting big money. So that's been very disappointing. Aaron Rodgers has been incredibly disappointing this year, and I think a lot of that has to do is, Jordy Nelson's coming back from ACL surgery. He's not fully healthy, so the chemistry might be a little bit rusty there. But Aaron Rodgers is missing wide open receivers, and he's getting ample protection in his offensive line. Is he declining because of age or diminishing skills? I don't know. He is 32 years old. He's approaching that age where quarterbacks start dipping a little bit. Most quarterbacks, unless you're Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. I think Rodgers, I think play calling also has a lot to do with it. And, his defense is consistently getting, scorched, both through the air and on the ground. Rodgers is completing 56% of his passes. His stats are worse than Brian Hoyer's. That can't be ignored. You can't bench Aaron Rodgers. He's Aaron Rodgers. They have no one better behind him. But should the Packers start looking at getting a potential replacement for Rodgers? Maybe. But, they drafted Brent Hundley from UCLA last year, but he's not the answer. Rodgers, I just think, needs to just start playing with a bit more confidence. I just feel like, he's got a bit of an ego. He's one of those guys that, if he makes a bad throw or something, it's the receiver's fault, like Greg Jennings, was saying. That Rodgers is quick to throw his receivers under the bus. But, the Green Bay Packers are a good team. They're well coached. I think Rodgers will get it going. Tonight's game against Chicago would be a great opportunity for him to get it going because they have a terrible defense. So we'll see what happens. But Aaron Rodgers has been very, very disappointing. Another disappointing player has been Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's benched right now for Geno Smith. We'll get more into his situation later. But, last year he completed, he threw for almost 4,000 yards, threw 31 touchdowns, which is a franchise record, 15 interceptions, and he was given a one-year deal worth $12 million. He hasn't even come close to producing that, so he's been a disappointment. Darrelle Revis has been a huge disappointment. I think his bad play from last year's game against Buffalo, where Sammy Watkins torched him, has carried over. A.J. Green beat the hell out of him, and they had that number 2 receiver in Buffalo, can't remember his name, he beat the hell out of him. Jeremy Maclin, Larry Fitzgerald, he's just been getting, and Jermaine Kearse and Doug Baldwin, he's been terrible. And, he may not be back next year. I would be shocked if the Jets didn't cut him. So, another disappointing player, Carson Palmer. He looks like his play from last year's NFC title game. He's been throwing interceptions. He hasn't been throwing the ball with as much confidence. He kind of looks like with what Kirk Cousins has been doing right now. Has not been throwing the ball with a lot of confidence. Hasn't been throwing it really that accurately, and he hasn't been performing well. And another disappointing player, and some of you might think this is funny, Jared Goff. He hasn't seen the field at all. For being drafted number 1 overall, and Jeff Fisher has done this with high, drafted quarterbacks. Back in 1995, they drafted Steve McNair number 3 overall, and he sat on the bench for a year behind Chris Chandler. We'll see. Goff could still very well turn into being a great player. But the fact that he can't beat out Case Keenum, come on, So I think that it's disappointing. Goff looks like he might be a bust. So, we'll see what happens with that. But speaking of quarterbacks, we're going to talk about what's going on in New York. Ryan Fitzpatrick being benched for Geno. And my first reaction is, what took so long? Fitzpatrick should have been benched after the Kansas City game. 6 interceptions. He threw 3 against Seattle. Against Pittsburgh, he wasn't making plays. And against the Cardinals, he was just god-awful. So, but I think that the Jets should have gone to Bryce Petty because you know what you're getting with Geno. You're getting a quarterback that is like Fitzpatrick. He turns the ball over. He loses his composure. And I think that, the Jets have basically admitted they've made a mistake. They were right not. Rich McCagnon, the general manager of the Jets, was right not to give Fitzpatrick a long-term contract because of what he did, in the last game against Buffalo. The playoffs were there for the taking for them, and they stunk it up. 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter, and it cost him a chance to get a long-term contract. And Ryan Fitzpatrick has, his ceiling is not very high. He was decent in Buffalo with Chan Gailey. He got a big contract, and he threw interceptions again. He's fool's gold. He is a quarterback tease, as they say it. But, they have 2 other quarterbacks on the roster. They have Bryce Petty from Baylor, which they drafted last year, and Christian Hackenberg from Penn State. And, they planned to redshirt Hackenberg this year, so maybe he's not quite ready yet. But I think they should look at Bryce Petty. They need to look at the quarterbacks they have and determine if any of them are the guy moving forward. And I'm not saying Bryce Petty or Christian Hackenberg are the guy. They may not be the guy. They could very well be the guy. But you already know what you're getting with Geno. And I think that the Jets aren't going anywhere this year. I mean, they're finished. They are DONE. So I just think that they need to evaluate Petty and Hackenberg and try with them. They have nothing to lose. Another team that is DONE are the Carolina Panthers. I mean, you let Josh Norman go. Now their secondary is terrible. Their defensive line is not getting pressure on the quarterback. They didn't address the offensive line at all. Their first-round pick, Vernon Butler, the D-tackle, he's not playing this year, so that was a wasted pick, And Ron Rivera, like I said in the last podcast, Ron Rivera, Mike Shula, and Sean McDermott are all fantastic coaches. They're not going anywhere. If anyone's going to feel heat, it's David Gettleman, the general manager, for not addressing the team's needs or keeping the players that they needed. Is he going to get fired? Probably not. I mean, he's done pretty well drafting. But if he fails again, I could see them making a change. So, but the Carolina Panthers are DONE, done. When we get back, we're going to do Dick's Picks for the week. And we're back doing Dick's Picks for the week. And the first one is Chicago at Green Bay. I mean, this is a tough one to pick, but I'm going to go with the Packers because it's in Lambeau. I trust Aaron Rodgers more than I trust Brian Hoyer. But, these Bear-Packer games are tight. I think Chicago will make it interesting, but at the end of the day, I trust Aaron Rodgers more than Brian Hoyer, so I like the Packers. The Giants at the Rams, I like the Giants this game just because I trust Eli more than I trust Case Keenum. The Rams' defense is wildly inconsistent. One day they shut you down, the other day they let you throw wild. So I like the Giants. Cleveland at Cincinnati, this could be interesting. The Browns are really close to getting off the schneid, but unfortunately I will be taking the Cincinnati Bengals. I just think they're a better team. They're playing in Cincinnati, and but the Browns always make it interesting. I think it'll be a tight game, but I like Cincinnati. The Redskins at the Lions. I like the Redskins this game, and the reason being is because the Detroit Lions are not consistent. There are a couple factors that could play in the Lions' favor, like Deshaun Jackson sat out again practice with a sore shoulder. Jay Gruden is optimistic that it's not a big deal, so Jackson will probably play. Reed is probably not going to play because of the concussions, but they're getting Sua Cravens back, which is going to be a big boost. The Redskins still have Vernon Davis. They did fine last week against the Eagles without Jordan Reed. The Lions, their defense is wildly inconsistent. They let bad quarterbacks throw for 300 yards. Case Keenum threw 3 touchdowns yesterday, and their secondary's been disappointing. They let Kenny Britt run wild all over them. So who knows what kind of damage Garcon and Jackson and Vernon Davis and Crowder could do. The Redskins are playing. I just think the Redskins are a better team. They're playing more consistently than the Lions are, but The Redskins are going to keep it close because they like to let teams hang around. And the Lions are good. They've beaten the Redskins 3 straight times. So, but I think that the Redskins will get over the hump. But it's going to be hard containing Stafford. But I trust the Redskins more in this game. Oakland at Jacksonville. I like the Raiders just because the Jaguars are wildly inconsistent. They're squeaking by teams that aren't good. I think Jack Del Rio will come back and beat his former team. So I like the Raiders. The Saints at the Chiefs. I like Kansas City this game just because the Saints defense is inconsistent. Kansas City can really rush the passer and intercept passes. It's hard to win in Kansas City. I just like the Chiefs' chances better. Buffalo at Miami. I like the Bills this game just because they're red hot right now. The Dolphins are wildly inconsistent, and the Bills have pretty much had their number the last couple times. The Ravens at the Jets. I like the Ravens just because I think that Mike Wallace is going to have a big game against Darrelle Revis. The Ravens' offense showed that they're getting better. Geno playing. I think that the Ravens are going to, make him, force balls. I just think the Ravens are a better team. The Vikings at the Eagles. I like the Vikings just because, that defense is ferocious. It's going to be a lot for Carson Wentz to handle, but I think that the Eagles' defense, they were shamed so bad last week against the Redskins. I think they'll make it interesting because, Sam Bradford, is an okay quarterback, but I think if the Vikings watch the tape and they pound the ball with Asiata, I think that they'll get another win, so I like the Vikings. Indy at Tennessee. I like the Titans just because the Colts are terrible. They're inconsistent. The Titans are going to run the ball down their throat because Lamar Miller went wild, so Murray and Henry could do a lot of damage. Titans play solid defense. I just think they're a better team. I like Tennessee that game. San Diego at the Falcons. I like the Falcons. I think they're a better team than the Chargers. San Diego got a big win against the Broncos last week, but the Falcons are playing tough against good teams. I just think that they're better, and I like the Falcons. The Bucs at the 49ers. I like the Bucs just because I trust Jameis Winston more than Colin Kaepernick. The 49ers are absolutely terrible. Their defense is awful. The Vincent Jackson injury is a big one. The Buccaneers have had a lot of injuries, but I just think that they'll find a way to win that game. New England at Pittsburgh. This is a no-brainer. I'm going with the Patriots because Landry Jones is starting. He's terrible, so I'm going to use my big gorilla, tiny flea analogy. The Steelers have no chance to win this game. The big gorilla, who is the Patriots, will squash the tiny flea Steelers. Sorry, guys, but New England's going to run wild on you all. Seattle at Arizona. I like the Cardinals this game. It's in Arizona. Seattle their defense isn't playing with the type of, aggression and, lockdown ability like they have in the past. The Cardinals look like they're starting to play a little bit better. I like the Cardinals' chances. And then Houston at Denver. I like the Broncos. I think that they're going to get after Osweiler. They're going to force him to make mistakes. They're going to stuff the run game and make him beat him. They know his tendencies, and I just like the Broncos. So those are Dick's picks for the week. If you would like to be on the podcast, please email executivedirector.fgs@gmail.com and put guest speaker in the subject line. Again, that is executivedirector.fgs@gmail.com. Put guest speaker in the subject line. Thank you very much and have a great week.